Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I hope you're doing well, actually, and I hope the lockdown is going okay for you. Guillaume Carlier, the Propel Head of Content and Innovation. Really happy to be there today. I know you're starting to be really used to the daily talks. So just a little reminder for the new joiners. It's every day 4 p.m. Paris time. It's today 3 p.m. in London. It's one of several speakers presenting a topic for 20 minutes, and then the 10 minutes Q&A session. And for this 10 minutes Q&A session, you take the control with the bottom of your screen, the Q&A button. Today, it's a really special WeWork Chat session. It's a kind of fireside chat about the future of work with Leanne Tritton from ING Media and Ronen Journo from WeWork. Are you there? So please, really happy to have you there today. So again, the 25 minutes fireside chat between you, and then this Q&A session for this amazing time about the future of work. Please, the place is yours.
Thank you very much. And Ronen, it's fantastic to be chatting to you and with all of our participants who are from all over the world. And obviously, the future of work is one of the major issues that we're all confronting at the moment. And, you know, just before I came onto this call, the BBC have put up another article saying the death of the office, that we won't have an office anymore. So I know you're in your Paris home, and I'm speaking to you from our London office in Shoreditch. Can I just jump straight in? I don't want to talk about really what's going to happen over the coming weeks as people return to the office and those sort of very immediate steps. You know, I want to take us to sort of an imaginary time in January 2021 and what the office is going to look like. As I understand it, you've been talking to, you know, sort of 68 sort of leaders in real estate who are responsible for around about 5 million workers around the world. What are they saying?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much, Guillaume and Leanne, for the opportunity. And I agree, I think we need to deal with the transition in every country, in every enterprise, in its own pace. And everyone is going to take a different approach to it. But I think the most important, the most interesting is actually the ramifications to this physical envelope we call an office once we get into a new norm. So when is that new norm? Is it January or is it this time next year? I think we will all witness and kind of experience. But what we've been hearing from a lot of enterprises and what we're seeing in the press is that different corporations are seizing this as opportunities to drive much more fundamental changes in the way that they manage their workforce, in the way they offer people choice, and in the way they manage the second largest expense on their books, being real estate. So at one extreme, we have companies such as Twitter who declared that's the end of the office. We'd never have to go back to an office. Then you have Facebook who said, well, let's be careful. Some folks will have to come to the office, the graduates, the younger generation who perhaps don't have the space to work from home and actually need the social interaction much more than others. But let's take a closer look at that and let's look at data. What is the data telling us about the ramifications of working from home for a prolonged period of time? Are we being productive? Can we actually measure productivity? And many companies that we've spoken to are measuring productivity. They're actually seeing significant increases in productivities of certain types of activities, certain types of roles. Companies are also saying, well, wait a minute, but what are the social ramifications? We spoke a lot about mental health in the last few years, but do we know what hardship are people experiencing by being at home for such a prolonged period of time? And if we do give people choice, what kind of different environments would they want to use? So I'm a strong believer that this is not the end of the office. This is not the death of the office. However, I think in the new norm, the purpose of the office will have to change. If we're going to ask people to commute by train, by car, by underground, to a destination, then the time they're going to spend in that destination is going to be about physical interaction with other humans. It's going to be about creativity. It's going to be about collaboration. It's going to be about having some, ad hoc conversations that were not scheduled. It's going to be about the social aspect of it. It's not going to be necessarily for heads down process work. And therefore, that office will have to be repurposed, will have to be redesigned, will have to be replanned. And different measures apply to that.
But that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the whole concept of managing creativity out of human beings, I think, are we looking at it the wrong way around in terms of talking about how to repurpose the office, but you're still looking at sort of scheduling creativity. If you're saying, come to the office on Wednesday and Thursday, and they're your creative days, is that how it works?
So that's a great question. So learning from two different type of conversations I had recently, speaking to some architects who have, by no choice, are having now to design buildings and spaces virtually. So they're working with creative teams, but using technology. And then speaking to some folks from the technology world, where again, teams are having to come together to write code, brainstorm ideas, and they're having to use technology to do such things. So I'm not sure it's going to be one or the other. If we look at the last 20 years, being able to work anytime, anywhere, any place using any device is not new. Mm-hmm. It's new for some industries, and it's new at the global scale, but it's not new, right? Telepresence, WebEx, Skype, many of us had access to that already 15 years ago. So I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think we will design offices just for creative moment and just for collaboration and other tools and other spaces for process work. I think what we will do is we'll see a greater integration of spaces and technology and putting the human at the center, actually giving people choice as to how to perform their work and where to do it and using what devices. Mm-hmm. So I honestly think we're just going to see an acceleration of a trend that many of us have already experienced and witnessed for a while now.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned productivity earlier and people measuring it. And I think, particularly in sort of professional services, productivity is very difficult to manage. I think one of the reasons, people always talk about poor management, but I think it's very difficult to really measure outcomes at times in some industries. So will you see more training in terms of management? Is that going to be required?
So yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, what I'm hearing from the professional services firms and in particular the legal profession is that they can measure productivity, even though it's in the virtual realm, if you like. And it's just about focusing attention to what measures are important and what are not important. So I think in every role that is performed by knowledge workers, there is an ability to measure that productivity. The question is whether we have measured it in kind of the virtual concept or whether it was associated with presentism, whether it was associated with the hours you clock in the office and how much collaboration you actually carry out with other colleagues. And attached to that, I agree with you. I think there will be waves of managers who will have to be retrained on how to manage people and trust people when they're not physically with them. And management will have to continue to shift and evolve to be management by output, management by your degree of collaboration with others, as opposed to the hours you are physically present in any particular place. In many tech companies, that has been the way things have always been. So I think what we're going to see is now other organizations, other types of enterprises who haven't embraced that. So for the ones who adopted agile working and activity-based working before COVID, the transition is probably going to be lighter than the ones who really have never adopted any of this.
Sure. And look, I don't disagree. I think this halfway house is where life will end up. But what I'm quite interested in as well is I guess, human nature in terms of being close to the center of action. I mean, you know, it was interesting with Mark Zuckerberg's announcement. You know, I can't imagine sort of the masters of the universe of Facebook wanting to be too far away from where the action is. And, you know, people have fought very, very hard over decades to try and, particularly women, how do we get into those top tables? And that's through being discovered, you know, by those moments, not going through your line manager. So how is that going to work, and how are we going to ensure that we do get diverse talent coming through?
Yeah, I think you're really addressing a major issue that, you know, one chief HR officer that I spoke to raised in the conversations we had, and she said, look, I'm telling my board not to get too excited about reducing our real estate footprint. I'm telling my board working from home is not here to be permanent, because we haven't yet fully understood the ramifications. And it's not just ramifications of hardship, but also how do we deal with you know, diversity and inclusion? How do we deal with the new graduates who need mentorship and typically attached to a more senior partner, and they have to shadow that individual in order to grow in their career and learn the trades of the skills of a trade. So there are elements in management practice that I think are going to be studied extensively. At least that's what I'm learning from the conversations I've had. And there's going to be a huge amount of surveys where companies will try and listen to the employees and kind of seek out what their perception, what's missing, what's not missing, how can we complement the virtual with the physical, and what would work and what would not work. I spoke to one gentleman this morning from Asia, a financial institution, and he shared with me that it's interesting that the very young employees in the bank can't wait to go back to the office. Because that's a social hub. Yeah. It's an important place for them to spend hours of the day. And they can't wait. When they've been surveyed, they said, we can't wait to go back, open the doors. So I think we're going to see a lot more surveying. I think we're going to see a lot more probably honest, open dialogue between different parts of the organization. Yes. You know, the human, the financial, technology, the real estate coming together.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that at the moment, you know, because everyone is forced into lockdown, everyone is on an equal playing field. So everyone's at home. But I don't know, as I say, it's the cynic in me. When the boss starts moving back, you know, presenteeism is an interesting phenomenon, because it's not only the bosses saying you've got to be in the office. Often it's, you know, in my career, I've observed it as people wanting to hang around to get access to power. But I think, you know, I think only time is going to tell. Can I just sort of, I was fascinated when we spoke last week. You said you've spoken to 68 real estate leaders from around the world, and I mean that's a lot of people to talk to in a couple of months, one-on-one. What were the aha moments that you heard back from, and particularly in relation to WeWork? What came through that you hadn't heard of before?
So quite a few. One of them was very much continuing just from the theme that we touched on a moment ago, and that is that by having this work from home imposed on us, what they witnessed is that there's actually a lot more connections, a lot more human connections taking place. Mm-hmm. And because we all appear as a little, you know, cube on a screen, in many ways, technology has democratized and informalized, you know, the way we're working. It's no longer, I'm the MD, therefore I'm sitting in the corner office, I'm wearing a good looking, you know, good suit. Here we are all humans on the screen with a voice. So that's kind of the first aha, which is the recognition that technology as an enabler is really powerful. Another is the fact that many of these trends have been around. Some leaders have been trying to implement this in their companies, and the barriers often have been the C-suite. And yet now the C-suite is also operating from their bedrooms. So the change, the mindset shift that has happened. And the taboo has been smashed. So some of these leaders are saying, I hope we never, ever go back to the old. We have to go back to a new norm. We have to evolve it. We have to figure it out for the context of our company. But I hope we never go back to the old. Another observation that has come up is the fact that we're all using now new language. So essential workers. So who is essential to go back to the office in the next 6 months and who is not? The fact that some people say we are going back to work or we're going back to the office. But in many ways, none of us ever stop working. We have just been confined to our houses with our families. So that was interesting. With the new terminology, things like working from home, working from the office, yes, we all played with that. But now the third place is coming up, flex. How about working from near home? Can I be good to the environment? Can I avoid the commute? Can I use a bicycle to go to a local flex operator, whether it's a WeWork or whether it's another operator, is come up to the surface. And the fact that flexibility is going to be accelerated. Everybody is going to go after flexibility in the way they consume space at a much, much faster rate than ever before. Either because they don't want to spend capex, so they cannot commit because the business environment is so volatile, or purely because this has been such a shock to the system that the boards are now demanding flexibility. They are seeing this huge expense of empty offices sitting empty for 3 months, for 6 months, and they're saying, but we're operating, so why do I need that?
Yeah. But for WeWork, if I can ask the obvious question,
Please.
I mean, you and the flex office market, you can be the winners and losers in this, can't you? Because on one hand, companies can say, well, I don't need office, so I'm going to reduce. And, for people who've got long leases, that's harder to do. So they've got to make those assets work. But if they've got short-term leases, they can pivot quite quickly. So how is WeWork dealing with this?
Yeah. So, yeah, I spoke that we didn't necessarily want to make it about WeWork. So for the audience here, this is not a sales pitch of WeWork. So please don't take it as such.
Or flex office providers in general.
Yeah, but let's speak about WeWork for a moment. So by December, we will have a platform with over 1,000 locations around the world. Okay, and if you take a city like London, we will be north of 60 locations. Across the UK, this number will be far bigger. So when you're speaking to the large enterprises, what we're seeing is that the whole concept of the city as a campus can become very real for a large occupier. You could look at your demographics, you could look at the 50 to 60 locations that we work in London and say, I want access to all of these buildings for 10,000 employees. And by doing that, I'm avoiding them having to take the underground. I'm avoiding them additional commute, as an example. When you have a workforce that's distributed across the whole UK, you can say, you know what, you have, let's say, just for argument's sake, 70 or 80 locations across the UK. If I can enable my workforce to access all of these locations, in addition to WeWork's competitors, then I'm providing choice, I'm providing flexibility that we've never had before. Mm-hmm. And I think, I like to think that this is prime time for all these spaces of service operators. That
You've slightly frozen. Ronen, I think you've frozen, but this might be, while we wait for Ronen to come back, this might be a good time. If anyone's got any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'm not sure who Ronen's broadband provider is, but I guess this is one of the challenges of working from home in real time. So again, I think he's coming back. Let's hope so. So again, for those people listening, we've got another 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions they'd like me to ask, please send them through via the Q&A section below. I'm just going to just chat until we get Ronen back to us, and I think Guillaume is making contact with him at the moment. But I'd be interested to hear if anyone can send messages through. As I said, we're in London, and we've had a few people back in the office over the last couple of weeks. And I think it's been an interesting exercise to see those who want to come back and those who don't. And picking up on what Ronen said earlier, I think the younger members are definitely keener to come into that.
Yeah,
Ronen
Leanne,
is
I'm
back.
back. Yeah, technology has let us down. Oh, I do apologize for that.
That's okay, no problem. No problem. So, Ronen, we were just, I think, you know, talking about the flex office providers. For those, you know, some of the companies that obviously have got huge financial investment already in office infrastructure. How quickly do you think they can pivot? Do you see this as a 5-year project, or do you think that, you know, from what you've heard, are they commissioning architects and getting this moving straight away?
So unfortunately, none of this moves very fast, right? So what I have heard is that many corporates who are about to commit are kind of revisiting that. You know, why commit to leases when all of this is happening? So they're putting some of this back on the back burner. Some companies have frozen their capital investments altogether. And I can tell you that we have never been busier, right? People are engaging, people are approaching us and saying, let's talk. Because the one thing for sure is flexibility is going to be key. Just trying to figure it out. So I don't think any of this is going to happen overnight. The same with the transition, right? The transition is probably going to take anything up to 12 months. But over the next 36 months, I think we will see a pivot in the way the companies are looking at core portfolios that they manage directly and where do they consume space from others.
And I've got a question here regarding physical presence and power, and it's quite complex, isn't it? Because when you said earlier, young people want to be in the office, they need to learn, but they need to be mentored. So making sure that the mentors, the people with the experience, are close by. I mean, it's not going to work if the mentors are all living elsewhere in their houses. They've made it. You know, I'd prefer not to come into the office. I'd prefer not to have the commute. But the lifeblood of our organization really exists around mentorship and that sort of thing. So do you see it as being very fluid management, or will it be structured?
It's a great question. You know, time will tell. I think that people will adjust, right? Once the re-entry to the office is possible, I imagine people will be much more, will plan ahead. And in particular in the professional services, I imagine there will be instances where partners and whoever, you know, they're having to mentor will plan ahead. Hey, let's meet on X date in that particular location. And how do we complement that with, you know, the virtual connection? So I think people perhaps will become more conscious of how they use the tools and how they use the physical environment, where they spend time. On a personal basis, I can say that before my time at WeWork, when I was at Cisco, that's very much how we operated. We used to have days of the week when the team physically came together, and the rest of the time people worked anytime, anywhere, using any device, and that's pretty much how we run for almost 20 years. So I think it will just, people would be more conscious on how they do things when they do it.
Yeah. And I think, again, there's a very interesting question about support from an organization like WeWork on management. Do you think WeWork will go into sort of management consulting in that you're experts on flex working? Are you going to help people with these new ways of operating?
In the short term, I don't believe so, right? I think we have a new leader on board, whole new leadership team in New York, and our focus is very much our core business, right? It's continuing to grow this platform to, as I said, to over 1,000 buildings by the end of this year, and to make sure that the experience of our members and our community when they come into the building is at the best possible. I don't think we will deviate from that. I don't think we will go to compete with, the McKinseys of this world and others, or Deloitte, in this realm of, the management theory. I think there are others who probably do it much better than us. However, I can see a time where there will be much more joint conversations. So rather than perhaps working directly just with the head of real estate, the conversation will be wider. It will be head of real estate plus the CTO and the head of HR. Because now we're not just looking at desks and people, we're looking at that full enablement of the business.
And sort of broadly speaking, and again, I'm interested, I know you've been talking to people all over the world, but what do you believe is going to be the impact on cities? Because in London here, it's been very interesting. If you go out into sort of where people live, the suburbs or the places, the villages, small villages of London where people live, they're packed. There's people serving beers through holes in the wall and coffees, and the streets are teeming with people. And yet the city of London is a ghost town. There's hardly anybody around. Is there going to be a massive reshaping of our cities?
Wow. That's the $1 billion question. I attended a webinar recently that was offered by WeWork, and Sir Stuart Lipton, who developed many business parks in London, was interviewed by Despina and Philip. So if anyone hasn't attended, I recommend digging into it. But all three are big thinkers into kind of the world of work and cities, and what they shared was that history has taught us that people like busy places. If you go back to the coffee houses of London in the late 1600s and 1700s, people came together over a cup of coffee, over a beer, to do business and to physically come together. And ever since then, with all the technology that we had in the last 20 to 30 years, and some of us have been virtualized, much earlier than others, we still needed to come physically together. And I thought that when Cisco came with telepresence and WebEx, that was the end of an office and that was the end of travel. Well, guess what? The exact opposite happened, right? We saw the renaissance of the co-working spaces, the flex, and what are they about? They are spaces for people to congregate, spaces for people to come together and socialize and do business together. So, and that exploded, right? I mean, that's in every city, we have thousands of operators. I don't think we're going to see a massive change from that, because I think people like busy restaurants and people like busy city centers. But what I hope will happen is that we will be making a lot more choices about when we go into the city center and when we stay in a neighborhood in a small town. And hopefully we will also see the regeneration of local communities and local businesses in the small towns, which I think in many big cities, they've suffered because everybody was commuting in, right? In New York, in London, everybody's been commuting to the CBD. So hopefully we will see a rebalancing of that and alternative use of transportation. So rather than cars and trains and undergrounds, we will see people commuting shorter distances, or maybe 1 or 2 days a week using bicycles or scooters or other modes of transportation. But history has taught us that it's not the end of the city. The city is not going to come to an end just because of a virus.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Just in terms of sort of the areas around safety and you know, we're all hyper aware of this now. You know, indoor air, returning to the office. Are these going to be features? You know, are these going to be a sort of front and center of? You know, I can just imagine real estate brochures are all now about, you know, we've got fresh air, which was never really thought about from the end user perspective before.
So yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that's a revolution. I think what we're going to see is an acceleration of a trend that's already started to creep. If we think about what Edge you know, has been developing in places like Amsterdam, right, with Edge Olympics, and now in Berlin and in London, you know, very, very healthy buildings where there's a huge amount of technology that produces data and insights into how good is this environment on my physical well-being, on my mental well-being. Mm-hmm. And it's looking at everything from, you know, acoustics to the quality of lighting, quality of air, quality, you know, the water that they drink. And it's ensuring that both the operators of the environment and the users are informed and can make the right choices. So personally, my personal view is that I think we're going to see an acceleration of that. And I think we're going to get to a point where both employers and the employees will be looking at data to assess and to question each other. Is this helping me be a healthy and a productive person? And if it isn't, and my mobile phone shows that this is a very dirty building or the air quality is not right, I have a choice to leave and go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And the operator and the employer will be held, hopefully accountable, responsible for fixing things. But I don't think that's in the short term. I think that's going to take probably, you know, 2 to 3 years more of acceleration and investment.
I think, you know, just sort of as a, I guess, starting to wrap up, you know, from my point of view and lots of people I've spoken to, I think it's an incredibly optimistic time of potential change that we can introduce to make our lives better. And, you know, the true melding of sort of work and life. You know, we've talked about work-life balance for years. I think some of the aspects of work that we've all found in the last couple of years is, you know, as work intrudes into our home more, you know, trying to stop work, there's less life, there's more work. And having access into people's homes, you know, it's a big challenge, isn't it? Making sure that you can turn your camera off at the time you want to, and that you're not, you know, you're not being too intrusive into someone's personal life.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there will be many, you know, many people writing many books about this reset that we've all experienced, that we're all experiencing at the moment. You know, London Business School is offering some great webinars if anyone is interested in kind of, you know, in psychology and leadership, and it begins to address some of those topics. But it is truly the work-life integration that we're experiencing, and that's why I mentioned earlier that I think some organizations are really keen to understand the ramifications, not just the positive, but also the negative. So yes, on the positive side, we have shaved maybe 2 hours of commute every day, and maybe the lunch breaks, so maybe 2 or 3 hours of additional time given back to everyone. But what are the negative ramifications? Is it possible that people actually never have a break, that they're literally connected and working non-stop 7 days a week because the laptop is just there? So, and I think as a result of that, we're going to see hopefully more coaching and training, both to people, managers, different levels in organizations, of how to cope with it and how to embrace technology, but also embrace the choice that we're all going to be given, and the higher level of trust that I think organizations are going to have to display.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a fascinating journey. I think it'd be great if we did this again in 12 months' time, just to see where we've got to. And, you know, if we slip, you know, we keep talking about the new normal, we may end up going back to the old normal. Who knows? I saw a New York Times leader saying that actually nobody knows. We're desperate to talk about it because it gives us some sense of security to be able to sort of put ourselves into the future, but we don't know what that's going to be. But look, I think your thoughts today have been really fantastic, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you very much. I'm just going to finish on one last question that's just come in, and that is, what must we do to make going back to the office a success? Is there one or two things you can, you know, how do we go back successfully?
Wow. So in the very short term is helping people feel safe. And I think everyone in the industry, in the supply chain, is really, really focusing on that, whether it's physical distancing, whether it's increasing hygiene. What we can't avoid is the fact that we still have to travel using mass transportation, and there's only so much that can be made sterile. So I think in the short term, it's making people feel safe. But I think longer term, I'm a big believer in data. And I think the more we engage employees, the more we survey, the more we play back what we're learning, the more companies can actually formulate what's right for their industry, for their corporation, for their values, their culture. I don't think it's going to be kind of a one solution that fits all. But I don't think that we will ever go back to the old. A lot of taboos have been smashed in the last 90 days that have taken decades and decades of change management to drive, and it's all been accelerated. So I don't think we'll ever go back to the old. But hopefully we'll go into a new norm that is actually more humane. But data-driven. I think data is really important, and move away from just anecdotal experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think one of the very positive things about this whole experience is all of us have been able to implement change so very, very quickly. So even as we take steps forward, if we get them wrong, we can move quickly to fix them. And I hope we remember that and you know, don't get bogged into the bureaucracy that doesn't let us adjust. So, but thank you very much. And thank you to our audience, and apologies for the slight technical hitch, but great to see you. And as I say, it'd be great to catch up in a year's time and see how our journey is going on this new world. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.